Adrian N. Breitfelder, City Clerk, you are hereby directed to call a special session of the City Council to be held on Monday, June 2nd, 2025 at 5:30 p.m. in the Historic Federal Building for the purpose of conducting a work session to receive an update on the Poverty Reduction Plan.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to a special session of the Dubuque City Council for June 2nd, 2025. As a reminder to viewers and listeners, due to the nature of tonight's meeting topic, public input is not accepted. However, you may contact the City Council directly from the city's webpage at www.cityofdubuque.org/council contacts. Attendance for the session is as follows. Mayor Kavanaugh.
Here.
Council members Farber.
Here.
Jones.
Here.
Resnick.
Here.
Roussel.
Here.
Sprank.
Here.
Wethel. Here. City Manager Van Milligan.
Here.
And City Attorney Brumwell.
Here.
Thank you. Our work session topic is the Office of Shared Prosperity and Neighborhood Support's Poverty Reduction Plan Update Report. I will turn it over to their Director, Anderson Sanchi.
All right, thank you very much, Mayor, City Council members, City Manager Mike Van Milligan. My name is Anderson Sansi, and I'm the Director of the Office of Shared Prosperity and Neighborhood Support. As Adrian mentioned, today is going to be a yearly report on the poverty metrics. In front of you, you should have a PowerPoint presentation, and what we would ask you to do is, as we go through, you'll hear a little bit about the history, accomplishments from the Equitable Poverty Prevention Plan, and then you'll get to hear about some data. Whatever sparks your interest, or if there's something that catches your attention, we just ask you to highlight that information. And if there's room for dialogue with us, we welcome that. But also, and most importantly, especially around the data, if there's information that resonates for you as you think about going through goal setting, we ask that you highlight that information as well. So that way, as council members, you can talk about those data points during your goal setting process. So about a week and a half ago, I've had the privilege of going to Baltimore to participate in the International City Managers Association's first ever Economic Mobility and Opportunity Conference. This is where they brought municipalities from all over the country to talk about poverty or economic mobility. There in Baltimore, we had the opportunity to share best practices, learn from other municipalities of how they are lifting people out of poverty, got to talk about some data. And what was real interesting was the common question I get asked all the time when I travel all over the world to talk about our department specifically. How did you guys do it? That's the question I get. How did you guys do it? And for me, it's really the first bullet. You know, in 2018, the current council members and currently the council members right now, you centered real people's voices in the decision-making process. And you made poverty reduction a top priority. And not only did you listen to people, but you also infused some of the information from the Imagine Dubuque Comprehensive Plan. When you remember in the plan, multiple times poverty was called out, and specifically people were calling out not making enough ends meet, right? They couldn't afford the cost of living, and they asked that administration to do something about it. So you listened, you prioritized it, which directed city staff to do something about it. So in 2019, we went out from our RFP, and we had a consultant to come into our community to engage with both businesses, nonprofit organizations, those living in poverty, to understand our ecosystem. How are people navigating all of the various resources in our community? And from those conversations and creating a video with people living in poverty, there was a variety of promising practices or ideas populated. Some new ideas that we could think about and implement, but a variety of those programs or initiatives were existing things, but we needed better coordination. And the consultant thought that the city infrastructure or the city organization could be a good facilitator or a hub to bring nonprofits together so that way they're not competing with one another, but mostly complementing one another. So a lot of engagement that was done to bring people together to talk about poverty and to figure out what could we prioritize better. And from that plan also, you guys adopted the plan in 2021 and morphed an existing neighborhood development area to the Office of Shared Prosperity and Neighborhood Support. So some of the key findings were you see on the right hand or the left hand side the 8 determinants of poverty. So this is based on research and literature and interacting with a variety of people on the ground, trying to understand what part of our ecosystem or what part of our community are you struggling with. And out of that, we looked at data and we said, okay, what can we do differently within these systems? And so when we say the word systems, and I'm pretty sure you've heard multiple departments talk about the word systems, I want to try to break it into lame terms. So the city as an organization is a system. We offer products and services that is designed to meet residents where they're at. We recognize within our own system that not everyone is accessing our products or services the same. And so in order to address that, not only do we look at data, but we bring people together to figure out what can we do differently within our system or within our structure, again, to make sure everyone has access. And I want to give you a simple, but at times difficult example, which is how people receive information. At one point, the city was probably translating everything in English because that was our population, that was our structure. But as the community became more diverse and we had people who spoke in multiple language, we recognized that we had to work with the community to translate information so that way we can meet residents where they're at. So within our own system or within our own plan, over 57 action plans or 57 promising practices, again, some existing, some new, that the consultant and expert said that we should focus on to lift people up out of poverty. As we look within those 8 determinants, I kind of sum it up with what our research says, what people were struggling with. They were struggling at the time with livable paying jobs. They couldn't find affordable and safe housing. They were struggling to find quality and affordable childcare, and they struggled with also finding access to affordable transportation system. And so the consultant said those are some 4 core areas that as a city we should focus on. And as you know, through your leadership and prioritizing these areas throughout the community to make sure we're partnering with organizations like Greater Dubuque to make sure that we do have living wage jobs, that we do have a variety of affordable housings to meet people where they're at. Childcare has been a huge conversation amongst this leadership to address. And also, we constantly have conversations about how do we meet the needs of residents in a community with transportation. If people are going to hang out with family or get to work, we're constantly trying to figure out how to address transportation. And as a matter of fact, Ryan, our transportation director, I believe mentioned that they will be doing kind of an equity assessment this year around transportation, again, to figure out how to meet the needs of all of our residents in the community. So our department, again, is designed to be strategic and look at ways to address poverty from a systemic level. As I mentioned earlier, we're not a department that you're going to walk into our office and you're going to receive direct services. Our responsibility is to make sure that within those 8 systems that you saw on the screen, that we're working with those agencies, with those leaders to look at data, to talk to real people and to figure out within those systems, how do we make sure that the products and services that those systems offer to all of our residents, that all residents have access to that. And if all residents don't have access to those products and services, what can we do differently within those structures to make that a reality for all of our residents? So my role in that context as a director is really about alignment. So I constantly look at our Equitable Poverty Prevention Plan, look at the mayor's councils and goals and priorities. And as I meet with a variety of leaders throughout the year, is to understand their goals and priorities and make an alignment. And when there's ever alignment, I try to make sure that's a priority for our team. And then it's lights, camera, actions. We just go with that. Additionally, within the Equitable Poverty Prevention Plan, it's not just system work that we're looking to improve to make sure that all have access, but you've heard throughout the last 3 years is data is a key. It's not the only thing, but data is the key, and so Braden will be able to talk about community-wide level data and for you to see for yourself. how are people accessing all of these various services? And again, within the power that we have within a government body, what can we do differently? And then also for me to constantly think about is who do we need to partner with to make sure that within those services, people are improving. Poverty is an all hands on deck. You know, there's times where I'll get an email or it's like, hey, you know, you give me the one or two things that you're doing to lift poverty up. And it's really me just taking a step back to process, to understand intent, but to also inform people that poverty is very complex. You can fix the transportation system, but let's just say Anderson, who needs access to transportation system, if we also don't fix all the other things that I need, that may still keep me in poverty. I may need childcare. I may need a good paying job that meets my family need, and maybe it's not a second or a third shift. Poverty is complex, but the cool part is we have a lot of partners who are prioritizing poverty as well. We work real good with a lot of agencies throughout the community, the Foundation of Greater Dubuque, a lot of private partners as well that also see this as important because for them, it could just mean a workforce thing. They have to figure out how to get people working and thriving so that way their business is successful. And so if that's the commonality, we want to make sure that within those systems, everyone has access to whatever businesses that we're partnering with. So some of the accomplishments, you've seen this before. I won't go through each one, but I do want to highlight the ones that are bolded. So in year one, after I received the plan and constantly going through it, a low-hanging fruit was to work with our Hawkeye Area Community Action Plan, or HACAP, as they provide the Volunteer Income Tax Assistance Program. So I met with the volunteers, and one of the first questions that I asked them is, what role could the city play to help make your services better? And at that time, it was a need for more laptops and printers, so that way when the individual comes and they have to print out information and use computers, they needed access to that. So within our own structure, we were able to work with Chris Coleman's to get laptops and computer, and we worked with our friends from the county as well to get that information. But they also needed support with outreach. And so that's the unique thing about our department. We don't only have data, but we have people who actually do boots on the ground outreach. So literally just taking flyers, making sure that they're translated, and getting out in the community and handing out these flyers and posting them where we recognize there's a high concentration of people that will benefit from those services. I love this picture right here. The employment fair is one of the first things that we did also. And if you guys remember, I shared this story of the young man with the red hat. His name is Frank Washington, who's kind of posted all over NICC's website and marketing effort. This was a gentleman who had just an interesting life experience, I'll just say that. But because he turned his life around and started participating in programs like Opportunity Dubuque, I remember he and I interacting and him saying, man, all of these services and a lot of people within our community don't know about it. And he said, not only that, there's a lot of people within the community that participate in these programs, but they don't get the jobs afterwards. And so I remember him saying that, and so we brought employers together and community members together. So again, being a hub where we can bring people, doesn't matter if it's the business sector or if this is the community, together to have a conversation about issues that needed to be addressed, so that way, again, everyone has access. So the end goal of this was, so after he shared his comment, we had an HR there. I won't name the business at all, but the outcome of the conversation was the HR hearing from community members that we did everything correctly and still didn't even get an interview. The HR said, excuse me? The HR said, don't worry, and addressed it right away. And I got a text message that said, hey, we're going to make sure that everyone who participated in this would at least get an interview. And so for me, that's just part of how you can change systems, is when you bring real story and data together and allow people, especially those who are closest to the problem, to fix the issue. The next thing that I want to connect again with data and just outreach, you see in 2024, we partnered with the Community Foundation of Greater Dubuque and the TH to really hone in on the equity profile. And I know equity sometimes, especially at this time, is kind of a tough conversation to have with some people, but for us, it's really about, again, ensuring that all people have access to the products and services that are in the community, and finding creative ways to at least provide data and real stories to a variety of community members in one central location to talk about how do we make sure that people's experiences are experiences that are prospering in this community. And that's some of the conversations where people are constantly struggling and they can't figure out who's the who or how do I get simple services to address my own quality of life. Some people say being poor is a challenge. And we want to do something different within this community. We want to make sure, again, that collectively we're working together. And that's what we did with the Community Foundation of Greater Dubuque. We had over 8 series of community conversations around areas like workforce, jobs, transportation, arts and culture. We partnered at the Steeple Square. We invited community members to come. We had a panel. We talked about the data. Then we actually had people with real life experiences to talk about their experiences. And then we had community members ask questions about, okay, what can we do differently now that we know what we know? Or I didn't know that's what the data was telling us. I thought we all had the same experiences. So each month there would be a snapshot about that specific topic that led to the data walk, which many of you are aware of, where we met at the Community Foundation of Greater Dubuque. And we invited all community members to come and not only look at the data, but stand next to someone that you probably never met with and look at the data and spark conversation. That was just a hit of my hand. And so that was good. In addition to, we actually went into some of the businesses and we facilitated conversations. So that way we met with a variety of stakeholders. We talked about data, we talked about their lived experiences, and that was packaged into the snapshot. And so that was another thing called out from the poverty prevention plan to say, hey, every 2 to 3 years, you should have that type of conversation and report out. And I think it's very beneficial, even as elected officials, to be able to take that report, look at it, and as you're making decisions, looking at that data and saying, okay, what can we do within our system to address whatever that needs to be addressed? For example, transportation is something in our control within the city of Dubuque. Of course, there's people over us who also give us guidance, but is there anything within the transportation system that we can do differently, again, to ensure that everyone has access? I also want to talk about the ICMA Economic Mobility and Opportunity Cohort. This was something that we did 2 years ago. As I mentioned, right now, there is a lot of conversations about economic mobility and opportunity or poverty reduction. A few weeks ago, I attended the conference, but I've attended a lot of conferences in the last few years about just this topic, and it's really exciting that many municipalities are starting to jump on board because they realize that poverty is something that is essential to talk about in our community. And if we want to be a destination of choice, we have to figure out how to be a destination of choice, meaning we want to make sure that the people who are in our community are thriving, whatever that may mean for them. We also want to make sure we have an environment, if people are choosing to move to our community, that there's infrastructure in place that will allow them to thrive. And when they can't thrive, it's still being intentional to say, what can we do differently within our system to ensure that that does happen? Because if we don't do that as various institutions, we won't be a destination of choice. People will go where they can thrive, not where they're going to die. And so I'm thankful again that we do have a community that appreciates the conversation, appreciates this department, and wants to continue to figure out what can we do within our system to make it a reality. And it also includes engaging real people who are closest to the problem. And in 2024, actually, you'll see we partnered with the Women's Leadership Network, and we talked about the challenges that women are experiencing in the workforce, because we recognize with the data that women and men, just based on that, they have different experiences. And we partnered with the Women's Leadership Network, and we said, hey, as a department, like Anderson couldn't be the one to facilitate the conversation, but we would love to bring real data, and we would love for you to assist us with real conversation. And Liz will never take credit for this, but Liz behind me was very instrumental with facilitating the conversation. Braden Daniels, and we have a variety of other, Nusrat, brought the data. And without those real stories and data, you don't have meaningful conversation for people to have perspective. And I think it's important that we constantly create space where people can have perspective to figure out what can we do differently, again, to make sure everyone has access. And so these are a few things that we've been able to do with your leadership, providing support, with the city manager's leadership, providing support, our team trying to build strategic alignment within the community, again, to make sure that everyone's rowing the boat in the same direction, because it's not one agency that's responsible solely for dealing with poverty. Poverty is very complex. We need all hands on deck rowing in the same direction. And so now I'm going to welcome Braden to come up to talk about some data. And again, as he's talking about some data, you may have a lot of questions. So please highlight, circle, put a square or a star so that way we can process out loud with you. So welcome, Braden.
Thank you, Anderson. Thank you, Mayor, City Council, for having us here tonight and for your continued dedication to addressing poverty in the city of Dubuque. I do want to start with just a little bit about how we measure poverty and what a poverty rate means. So when we say that, we're referring to the percentage of people who live in a household with an income under the official poverty measure. That official poverty measure was first calculated in the 1960s as 3 times the cost of a minimum food diet, and since then has only mostly been adjusted for inflation. Despite the lack of a more in-depth methodology, it is a primary eligibility metric for a lot of financial assistance programs of various levels, some of which use 200, 300, 150% of it to kind of adjust for it not being the best measure of whether people are struggling. That being said, it is still a metric that is consistent and through which we can compare ourselves to other geographies and to ourselves at different points in time. The supplemental poverty measure is an additional metric that some federal agencies put together to better describe what it looks like when somebody's struggling to meet their basic needs, but that is not been implemented as far as what we consider the poverty rate to be. So, and just for context, that official poverty measure is, for a family of 4, that is $31,000 as the most recent update. I apologize, I'm going to get my notes up here quick. Hopefully just for me. Maybe I won't. Okay, so I will also give a little bit of background on what the different types of estimates are for most of this data comes from the American Survey, American Community Survey. It's the U.S. Census Bureau's primary annual product. So most everything you'll see here, with one exception, will be a 5-year estimate. That is a weighted average of 5 years worth of data. We use that because, for one thing, it is available for any size geography with a reportable data set. It's also, while it lacks currency, it's more accurate, and so we try to prioritize that, especially it's more accurate for smaller communities. Additionally, we don't get many 1-year estimates, which is typically what you would expect from a survey. You do it 1 year and you report the results from that year. Those are only fully available for geographies with 65,000 people, so we don't quite make the cut. We do get 1-year supplemental estimates, which are just a smaller subset of those, but again, for aside from one example being population counts, that is just less accurate than most 5-year estimates. So first we'll take a look at some population data. This shows Dubuque's population since 2018 by year. This is the one case where, because of the way that the Census Bureau measures population and the local partnerships that go along with that, our 1-year estimate is actually, our supplemental 1-year estimate is more accurate than the 5-year estimate. That only happens here. But regardless of what estimate you're looking at, we saw about a 1,000 person increase in our population, and that's about a 1.6% increase. And so we, most of that came along in 2020. That's not reflected in the 5-year estimate until 2021 because the Census Bureau was not originally very confident in their 2020 numbers until they got more data to back that up. But we are kind of stabilized. That first decline might have been a little bit of overcounting from 2020 to 2021, but we, 2 years now, have been slowly growing with about just under 59,000 people from 2022 to 2023, which is about 1,000 more people than where we were at in 2018, 2019. Additionally, while we don't have data past 2023 from that survey, the Census Bureau just recently released vintage population estimates, which do show continued growth into at least July of 2024. Comparing ourselves to the 11 largest cities in Iowa, we're just above the median in terms of population growth in the past 5 years. We are only about half of the average, but that average is significantly impacted by Ankeny's 20% population growth. This part of it's kind of cherry picking data, but if you take Ankeny out as well, we are above the average of the other cities. Our Dubuque's minority populations are graphed out here. They couldn't fit the white non-Hispanic population on this graph and still be able to read the others, but that population decreased about 2% from 2018 to 2023. The Black, African American alone population also decreased slightly, but all other populations increased over this time period. And essentially all of our population growth has been among minority populations, with the 2 or more race population being responsible for most of that growth, or the largest portion of that growth. Dubuque's population breakdown by gender has changed a little bit, but not especially significantly. Most of our population growth has been among men. We have about the same number of women in 2023 as we did in 2018, and about 1,000 more men. But that being said, Dubuque is still about 50.7% women and 49% men. Some key takeaways in this area of population. Dubuque's population increased by 1.6% from 2018 to 2023. Dubuque had the 5th greatest population increase of Iowa's 11 cities, and the white non-Hispanic and Black or African American populations shrunk slightly between 2018 and 2023, but all other populations grew. So we want to encourage you, as you're moving into this goal-setting process, is to consider where you can advocate for policies and practices that provide for inclusive community growth. One potential place to look would be how we can partner with our local higher education institutions to better retain graduates who come here from all over the Midwest and all over the country to study here and just might want to live here. Next, we'll take a look at some poverty data. Again, this is the official poverty measure, so that 3 times the minimum food diet from 1960. But still a valid measure to compare ourselves, just not necessarily representative of who's struggling and who's not. Our poverty rate has fallen 24% over the past 5 years, from 16% to 12.2%, with the 2 significant declines in that being in 2020 and 2021. That aligns with the expansion of a lot of federal social assistance programs and a couple rounds of stimulus checks. We did see that tick back up in 2022 as some of those programs expired or shrunk back down, but we've then seen poverty decrease again in 2023. Comparing ourselves to the other cities in Iowa, we currently have the 4th lowest poverty rate of these 11 cities. Back in 2018, we had the 6th lowest. Also in 2018, we were tied with the average at 16%. Today, or in 2023, we were 3 percentage points below the average of the other 10 cities. Along with that, we had the 2nd largest percent decrease in poverty among these cities, only outpaced by Ankeny. And our population growth over this, or our poverty rate decline over this time was 4 times the average change of the other 10 cities. This chart just kind of shows what you'll see coming along the next slides as well. The main thing I want to highlight here is that for every one of these populations in Dubuque, the poverty rate decreased except for the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander population. We see that again here with the all those other rates declining. I will say, and this will be a trend throughout the night, the American Indian Alaska Native alone population, I want to preface that with, it's a very small population in Dubuque. We don't have great data, so that margin of error is oftentimes in the 40 to 50%. That's not a problem that we have to the same degree with the other populations here, but I do want to preface that with some of the data you'll see with that population. But again, poverty rates decreased over these 5 years for every group except for the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander population. One reason for that might be that a big part of our Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander population is Marshallese, and the Marshall Islands have a compact of free association with the U.S., which means that people can freely come here, but from 1996 until it was recently changed in 2024, COFA migrants were not eligible for a number of social assistance programs. So missing out on that additional help during the pandemic, part of that additional help is probably contributes to that population not seeing a decline. Today, poverty is still greatest among the Black or African American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander populations. In both of those groups, more than 2 in 5 people are living in a household in poverty. Poverty rate by gender. So women did have higher poverty rates than men in both years. And while that did decline for both groups, the male poverty rate decline was a little bit greater than the female poverty rate decline. This graph shows the total population in poverty by race and ethnicity, and disaggregated by race and ethnicity. So again, while the Black or African American alone and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander populations are the most likely to be in poverty and are disproportionately impacted, what we want to point out here is that poverty affects our entire community, and addressing poverty helps our entire community. This shows a similar graph of households in poverty split up by family type, by the gender of the householder, the presence of children, and the presence of a spouse. So the really important thing to notice here is almost half, 49.7% of all households in poverty in Dubuque have a single mother as the head of household. That being said, child poverty has declined about 40% from 2018 to 2023. We see a similar pattern as we saw for the citywide poverty rate, with significant decreases in 2020 and 2021, followed by a tick back up in 2022 and a decline again in 2023. Some key takeaways in this area. Citywide poverty fell 24% from 16% to 12.2%, marking the second largest poverty decline among Iowa's 11 largest cities. Dubuque's poverty rate is now the fourth lowest of these cities after being the sixth lowest in 2018. Poverty rate fell for every race ethnicity group except for the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander population. And as of 2023, poverty was still highest among the Black or African American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander population. Both groups had more than 2 in 5 residents experiencing poverty. Women in Dubuque experienced poverty at a higher rate than men across both years. Both women and men experienced a decline in poverty from 2018 to 2023, but that decrease was smaller for women. Almost half of all households in poverty are comprised of a single female householder with children, although child poverty did fall by 40% between these years, with those largest decreases aligning with those expanded federal programs. Really what we want to highlight here is, especially with regard to that second to last bullet, really underscores the importance of childcare as it relates to poverty. Addressing childcare and creating options for affordable, accessible childcare, along with addressing pay barriers and other barriers across all 8 determinants and all kinds of other issues that align with poverty, are really critical to addressing the whole picture. And the efforts spearheaded by Greater Dubuque Development, especially with the new child care center out on Chavanel Road, are a big step in the right direction. So we wanted to highlight that. Next, we'll move on and look at some income data. So from 2018 to 2023, Dubuque's median household income did outpace inflation. Our incomes rose about 24% over this time period, and inflation rose about 21%. That being said, we still have several groups who are experiencing median household incomes well below the general population. So the Black or African American alone, 2 or more race, and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander populations still have significantly lower median household incomes than the city as a whole. Every group here did see an increase from 2018 to 2023, but the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander population was the only group whose increase was significantly lower than the change in inflation. So that income only rose about half as quickly as inflation over this time period. We did see very significant increases in the some other race alone and Hispanic or Latino populations, but when we look at, this graph shows the percentage of people living alone. So when we're adding context to the story about household incomes, for both of those groups, as well as the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander group, we saw a significant decline in the percentage of people who per report living alone. That means that a lot of households are consolidating. People are moving in with roommates. People are moving in with families. So for the some other race and Hispanic or Latino populations, it might mean that these big increases on the left side of the graph here aren't fully reflective of individual people making more money. It's probably a little bit of both. It also means, on the other side of that, the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander population that experienced very little growth, some of that growth might also be explained by household consolidation, which means that that group may be struggling even more. And In a little bit of good news, the Black or African American population saw both an increase in the percent living alone and a pretty sizable increase in median household income, meaning that that increase per person might actually be higher than is reflected here. But again, the Black or African American, multiracial, and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander populations are still experiencing the lowest household incomes. Looking at incomes by women, so not on this slide, but when we looked at women working full-time year-round as compared to comparable men, women only made 76% of men's wages as of 2023. That improved a little bit from women making 75% of men's wages in 2018. But what this graph specifically highlights is across the entire Dubuque Metro, within every single economic sector, women make less than men. Some key takeaways in this area of income. Median household income slightly outpaced inflation between 2018 and 2023, rising for all race ethnicity groups. Again, the some other race, Black or African American, and Hispanic Latino populations had the greatest increase in those incomes. And while Black or African American households still have the lowest median household income of every group, the some other race and Hispanic Latino increases might have been partially driven by household consolidation, and the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander population had a income growth that was outpaced by inflation. But all in all, the Black or African American, multiracial, and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander populations are still having the lowest median household incomes, all well below the city median household income. The median income for women employed full-time was 76% of that of men. That improved slightly from 2018, and as of the first quarter of 2024, women were making less than men in every economic sector in Dubuque County. I want to share that just how we're doing the work internally. When the city engaged in its compensation classification study that I know you're all extremely familiar with, we did work to examine national data sets and internal data related to that study to make sure that we weren't continuing cycles of pay discrimination wherever we could. Next, we'll move on to look at some workforce-related data. So this is labor force participation by race and ethnicity. Just to explain a little bit about what that means, somebody is in the labor force if they are either employed or if they are actively looking for work in the past 4 weeks. And so what we see here is that labor force participation grew for the Asian alone, some other race, 2 or more race, and Black or African American populations, while declining for all others. This is another case where, so the American Indian Alaska Native population has the lowest the lowest labor force participation rate, and as we'll see in a second, the highest unemployment rate. But both of those numbers again have very high margins of error. So I don't have a lot of confidence in those numbers, but the rest of these don't have the same issues. The next lowest labor force participation rates are among the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander and white alone non-Hispanic populations. Looking to unemployment, again, that's highest among the American Indian Alaska Native population, but that's not a very confident number. The next highest unemployment rates are among the Black or African American, and then the 2 or more race and some other race populations. The lowest unemployment rate is among the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander population. I do want to point out with regard to a couple of those, looking back at labor force participation, the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander population saw a large decline in labor force participation, which may mean that the unemployment rate decline also partially reflects people who became disaffected from the workforce, who may have been long-term unemployed and stopped looking for work as actively. Another thing I want to point out is the increase in unemployment among the Black or African American population coincides with also an increase in labor force participation, which means that more people in that community are looking for jobs, but a growing share are unable to find work. This graph looks at employment by race and ethnicity within every economic sector in Dubuque County. The bars are ordered from left to right in terms of how high paying that sector is in average monthly earnings. And then the color coding within each bar reflects the percentage of white non-Hispanic employees in blue and the percentage of other employees in green. I am going to pull my notes back up for this one because I want to make sure I get these numbers right. So we can group these sectors into high-paying and low-paying sectors. And When we consider total employment across those sectors, Hispanic or non-white employees make up 12% of workers in low-paying sectors on the right side of this graph here, but only 8.5% of employees in high-paying sectors. Another way to look at that is that 60% of all workers from racial minority backgrounds work in low-paying sectors compared to only 50% of white non-Hispanic workers. In any case, however you want to look at that, non-white and Hispanic employees are overrepresented in those lower paying sectors and underrepresented in the higher paying sectors. Moving on to labor force participation rate by gender. So the male labor force participation rate fell a little bit, and the female labor force participation rate grew a decent amount, to the point that both of those numbers are very, very close in 2023. So we are seeing a very balanced workforce in Dubuque. Unemployment rate across those years stayed the same for the male population and rose a little bit for the female population, although unemployment is still higher among men than women. Similarly to what I showed a second ago with regard to race and ethnicity, this graph shows employment in low-paying sectors and high-paying sectors. And in the Dubuque Metro, women make up 63% of all employees in these low-paying sectors, and just 39% of employees in the high-paying sectors. Again, to look at that another way, women make 64% of women work on the right side of this graph here in the low-paying sectors, and only 35% of women work in the high-paying sectors on the left side. And the other thing I want to point out with this, as we saw in the income section, within every one of these sectors, even healthcare and social assistance, where women make up 82% of employees, women still make less than men across every economic sector. Some key takeaways in the area of workforce. So labor force participation rose for the Asian, some other race, multiracial, and Black African American populations, and fell for other groups. Unemployment was the highest among the American Indian, Alaska Native, and Black or African American populations, although again, that American Indian, Alaska Native estimate has a high error margin. Employees of minority race ethnicity status make up 12% of employees in low-paying sectors, and just 8.5% of employees in high-paying sectors, being overrepresented in lower-paying sectors. Labor force participation rates fell for men and rose for women, shrinking the difference between those values to just 0.3%, where there was a 6 percentage point difference in 2018. Unemployment rate is still higher for men than women, although the female unemployment rate grew a little bit since 2018, while the male unemployment rate stagnated. Women make up 63.5% of employees in low-paying sectors, but just under 39% of employees in high-paying sectors, again being overrepresented in those lower-paying sectors. And we did share, as Anderson mentioned earlier, last May, we did work with the Women's Leadership Network to share some data around similar data with that group, and alongside a panel discussion of women discussing workforce issues. And so I did want to give also a shout out to Nusrat Nashin in Public Works and Alex Baum with Community Foundation, who worked with me to put together that data, and which Nusrat then presented at that event. Next, we'll move on to some housing data. This slide highlights Dubuque's total housing stock. So we've had, and I don't have my numbers in front of me, I believe it was 1,700 unit increase in our total housing units from 2018 to 2023. However, we had about 1,900 more occupied housing units in that time period, which means while we are building more housing units and making more available, we're filling that housing faster than we are building it. As a result, you can see our occupancy rate has gone up a little bit since 2018, and for the same reason, our vacancy rate has fallen. We did see the home ownership rate increase about 2% over this time period. I did want to highlight going forward, I got the slide from the Planning Services Department showing that 2,600 lots and units have been proposed as of last week, 400 of which almost are affordable units. So we are making good progress on improving the housing stock even more quickly. Looking to home ownership rates, again, the Alaska Native American Indian population does have a high error margin, so I don't feel confident about the 100% there. But among all these populations, except for the Asian alone population, home ownership did increase from 2018 to 2023. Thinking back to the slide on the percentage of people living alone, some of the decline in Asian alone residents living in an owner-occupied house might be the fact that more are living alone, and so more people might move out to a rental or buy their own home. We have seen significant increases in the Hispanic or Latino, some other race, and Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander home ownership rates. But again, some of that could be reflecting household consolidation, but also at the same time, the Black or African American home ownership rate has almost doubled, and that comes alongside more people living alone, which means that that is truly reflecting additional home buying power. All that being said, the Black or African American alone and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander alone populations still have the lowest home ownership rates, which is not a coincidence given that those two populations also have the highest poverty rates. Some key takeaways in the area of housing. So Dubuque's housing stock has increased, but the occupancy rate has also increased, meaning that the supply of available vacant units is lower than in 2018 than it was in 2018. As of last week, though, the city has 2,600 units proposed, which will help us offset that declining vacancy rate and accommodate future population growth. Home ownership rates have increased slightly citywide and for all race ethnicity groups except for Asian alone residents. And those rates grew significantly for Hispanic, Latino, some other race, and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander populations, but that may be driven by a decrease in people living alone. Home ownership rates that grew significantly among the Black or African American population coincided with that increase in people living alone, suggesting that more people in that community have been able to achieve home ownership without that widespread household consolidation. And so, again, as you move into goal setting, we just want you to consider how you can continue to prioritize building more housing and creating housing opportunities for people so that everybody in Dubuque can have access to safe and affordable housing. Lastly, we'll take a look at some education data. So high school graduation rates have risen for the American Indian, Alaska Native, white alone, not Hispanic, Asian alone, and Hispanic or Latino, and significantly among the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander alone population. I also just realized I missed a slight increase in the Black or African American alone population. Some other race and two or more race populations saw very slight declines, but nothing to be significantly worried about in the change. That being said, the some other race alone and Hispanic Latino populations still have the lowest high school graduation rates, and the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander and Black or African American alone, along with those groups, still have lower than the low to mid 90s that we see in the other groups in the general population. Looking to bachelor's degree attainment rates, so this has increased for the multiracial, white, non-Hispanic, and Black or African American alone population, while decreasing for all other groups. This will be another case where the American Indian, Alaska Native estimate is not particularly reliable, so I don't know exactly where that number truly is, but the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander population does have the lowest bachelor's degree attainment rate, and that only has a margin of error of 7%, so that is a very disadvantaged population in that regard. And we still see that the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander, American Indian, Alaskan Native, some other race alone, and Black or African American populations do have significantly lower bachelor's degree attainment rates than the other populations here. Looking to gender, high school graduation rates rose since 2018 for both men and women. I rose slightly higher for women, and women have in both years had a slightly higher total high school graduation rate. Similar story for bachelor's degree attainment rates. Women had higher attainment rates both years, and while this number increased for both men and women from 2018 to 2023, that increase was larger for women. Some key takeaways in the area of education. So the high school graduation rate for Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander residents rose significantly by 56%, but bachelor's degree attainment is still lacking in that population, as well as the American Indian, Alaska Native, some other race, and Black or African American groups. Although again, the data for American Indian, Alaska Native populations has a high margin of error. High school graduation rates were also lowest among the Hispanic, Latino, and some other race population. Women have had slightly higher high school diploma and bachelor's degree attainment rates than men across both years, and high school diploma and bachelor's degree attainment rates rose for both men and women between 2018, with women's rates rising slightly faster. Here are the data sources we used. I do want to thank you all again for taking the time to let us talk about poverty, and I think we'll turn it over to you for questions if we have any time.
We ready for
Yeah, we heard the
questions?
applause in our head.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Well, yeah, we do have some time. We've got about 10 minutes until our next meeting starts here, so let's ask some questions or get some clarification if we want it. Mr. Resnick.
Just quickly, so I loved all the detail, and I want to go to a 30,000-foot question. And that is, poverty reduction is not a zero-sum game, like I guess some people feel. Like when you're helping some people, you're not helping others. But you made this point, sir, that poverty prevention helps everyone. And, what we're doing here, this is what causes the rising tide that helps everybody. But you mentioned it yourself. Poverty reduction, I think you said poverty reduction is good for the whole community. And I want you to answer how. And do we have data on that?
I'll go. So we've talked about this before. Thank you for the question. And I want to give you an example of how poverty will help everyone. When people are no longer struggling to make ends meet, they are able to do everything that Braden said earlier. They're able to get to work on time, which is going to benefit the workforce. They're able to take care of child care, so that way their children can learn and grow, which have a long impact to our society. They're paying taxes and not milking the system will also comes back to the city holistically. So there's a huge impact when we address poverty like that. And is there like a concrete data point right now to show that? I think eventually you'll see median household income go up. You'll see housing go up. You'll hear from workforce developers who talk to you as well to say, hey, our workforce is better. And I think most importantly, especially for us, you'll hear from residents who say, man, this is the place to grow, live, and die one day.
Since when is a distressed citizenry a plus for the community? Many communities, you say, well, don't go into this section of town or that section of town. Dubuque shouldn't be that way. We can have healthy neighborhoods in every part of town, and especially with your help. I think I really love these key findings of the poverty determinants. So great, and I'm glad that other communities are getting on board with this. And you're not just helping those folks that you're helping specifically, you're helping all of Dubuque, all of our Dubuque citizens. So thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Time for one, maybe two more. Mr. Rousseau.
Thank you. On the slide where you talked about how poverty is measured, you talked about the official poverty measure. That's really just 3 times the minimum food diet. But I know there's also the ALICE measurement that takes a lot more into consideration as far as the minimum things that people need. Do you ever use that measurement, and do you think we would see different results if we utilize that type of approach?
Yeah, so almost definitely we would see more people struggling, and it would be more reflective of the actual people who are struggling. That is something that the Community Foundation has spearheaded this year especially, and so we can definitely, I'm sure, share that data. I'm sure we can ask them for that data, and I'm sure we can get that back to you. But we definitely would see a change. Again, that official poverty metric is widely considered even by the federal agencies that choose to not use it at its 100% level to not be reflective of who is in need and who isn't.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Bethel.
My question really is, how do we share this data with other organizations, specifically Dubuque Community School District?
So let me answer this differently. So the schools are looking at this data point. I can assure you that. And I think for me, there's opportunities with not just the school district, but many agencies to figure out how do we better align. And so the schools go through their own strategic planning process alone. The city has their strategic plan process. I'm going to say they engage residents, but still in their box. I think there's opportunities just in my lane, in many different hats, for people to come together and put their strategic plan together and say, okay, who's the hammer, who's the nail? How do we leverage each other's resources for the same end goal? So that's how I respond.
And do you cross over this data with, for instance, Crescent Community Health Center? I mean, is there interaction of these data points? That all this work that you do is so rich, and I just want to make sure that people are utilizing it to its full capacity.
Yes, great question. So earlier on, I mentioned there's a variety of leaders that I meet with once a month, literally, and I sit down with them. And I don't only share our data, but I listen to their real stories. And so you mentioned Crescent. So Chad and I meet often. And actually, one of the things we're talking about right now as two organizations is the community health needs assessment, because that's coming down the pipeline again. And so that's going to take a lot of coordination with our team and the health sector. So yes to your question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, Anderson, Braden, Liz back there, thank you so much for being here tonight. We really do appreciate you sharing all this. It's always fascinating when you show up, but sometimes you bring more than other times, and having a full hour tonight to be able to talk about this, we really appreciate
And
it.
if I can just say one more thing, I just also want to publicly thank just the team back here, especially Braden. There's a lot that goes into putting data together, and you can see his notes didn't work, but he still killed it. So thank you to Braden and Liz helping us out with process, and Timwa. So we have an amazing team.
Yeah. Well, thanks for saying that. Thank you all. Really appreciate your time. Okay, well, we will be adjourned for a few minutes until 6:30 when our regular meeting starts.